So last week I had hit my limit. I have some friends who've been keeping count of the days since they began sheltering in place as a family, and I'm not that organized. So I think we're into day 60 something-ish. But honestly, some days it feels like we've been doing this for 6 years. And I knew I'd hit my limit when the tiniest edge of an envelope got torn accidentally and I started to cry. And not like the cute little single tear cry, or even that shaking lower lip, shuddering sigh, kind of crying. No. This was the ugly cry. And those who've experienced the ugly cry know the power of a good ugly cry. I honestly don't think I've had a good ugly cry like this in 4 or 5 years. And I sobbed. I wailed. I had the tears and the snot and the arms in the air, wildly gesturing to God that I was not okay because the envelope tore. And then I was fine. Or so I thought, until I received a frustrating phone call that caused me to hang up and scream for 45 seconds straight. For those of us with an Instant Pot, it's kind of like that moment when the cooking has finished and you get to push the button to release all that steam from the pressure cooker. That's kind of what those two events felt like. And after I finished my scream, I straightened up a bit and looked over at Chris, my husband, and I was like, yeah, okay, I'm good now. By the way, did you know that next Sunday is Mental Health Sunday? It feels like Mental Health Sunday couldn't have come at a better time, even though technically it is always observed by the United Church of Christ on the third Sunday of May every single year. I read an article this week called, "We Have Begun the Dreaded Third Quarter of Isolation When, Yes, Things Get Weird." Of course, I clicked on that. That's a great title. And this article examined the experiences of those who've gone into voluntarily isolated situations, notably those who've worked in remote areas like Antarctica or space, and then applied those findings to the involuntary isolation of sheltering in place. What the article confirms is that, yep, if you are feeling a little extra on edge or emotional or aggressive, then you're not alone. In a situation where the duration of time in isolation is known, like a mission that's, a 6-month mission to Antarctica or something, then typically mood and morale reach their lowest point somewhere between the 1/2 and 2/3 mark of the mission, as one review found. The third quarter can extend, however, if something happens to prevent the mission from coming to completion. So if there's inclement weather that causes flights to be grounded for an extra length of time, or I don't know what happens in Antarctica, like ice forms around there. I don't know. I've never been to Antarctica, but you can imagine that there are different ways that a mission could really be extended indefinitely. And that third quarter phenomenon can stretch on until travel home can be made, and made safely. So the writer of this article compares COVID to this, saying we've reached that third quarter mark, at least in our minds. We can see the curve flattening. Some businesses are opening back up, and we're eager to get back in the world again. However, since we don't know what it will look like when we do start getting out more often, there's this indeterminate amount of time ahead of us due to a second wave of infection or other factors that we can't even predict. So we're essentially trapped in this third quarter weirdness loop right now. And we've experienced all of that quirky fun of making our own sourdough starter and having backyard campouts. That was all in the first and second quarter of this. Now, the novelty of the novel coronavirus has worn off. The cuddle time with our young ones that was so delightful 4 or 5 weeks ago is beginning to make us feel like we're overstimulated and touched out. The joy at finally having time to read the stack of books that's been sitting by our bed for 6 years, or tackling the big home improvement projects, that's worn thin, and we're just sick of being in the same surroundings day in and day out, still surrounded by a bunch of books we haven't read and half-finished home improvement projects, let's be real. Some of us have even been working through this pandemic and frustrated by the lack of PPE and ears that are raw and red from elastic on face masks that are tugging all day long, and filled with worry about exposure to the virus that might then get brought home and then infect our loved ones and those closest to us. Clearly, a Sunday devoted to mental health is timely for us right now. The psalmist who wrote Psalm 66 sounds like they had also experienced the weirdness of the third quarter as well. For you, O God, have tested us. You have tried us as silver is tried. You brought us into the net. You laid burdens on our backs. You let people ride over our heads. We went through fire and through water, yet you have brought us out to a spacious place. When I read it, I can feel the frustration of being pushed to one's limits, of a community being pushed to their limits of what they can handle. I can easily read this and insert my own experiences between the lines. You have brought us into the net, and for the community good, kept us in our homes. You laid burdens on our back as we were tasked with working from home while managing our children's distance learning and still trying to buoy everyone's morale. You let people ride over our heads while a virus with deadly potential spread exponentially. We went through fire and water. We went from our nighttime pajamas into our slightly fancier daytime pajamas and felt the lethargy of depression or the pinpricks of anxiety. And yet, you brought us into a spacious place. We haven't yet reached the spacious place part of our own time of trial. That mark between fire and water and the spacious place, well, that right there is the psalmist's third quarter, and that's where that took place. And yet we can see from both this psalm and the article about Antarctic and space explorers that there is eventually a time when we come out of the extended journey. The third quarter doesn't drag on forever, even though while we're in it, it feels like it will never end. So what does this have to do with mental health then? Well, for those of us with mental health concerns, we might even be able to give a few pointers to anyone who's never experienced some of the things we're collectively experiencing globally. When it comes to anxiety about the future and wondering how long this might drag out, grounding techniques are useful to bring oneself down from the feelings of panic. So finding ways to connect with one's immediate surroundings is a really good way. It's been recommended to find some way to engage each of the senses. So if I were to use my current surroundings, which is my backyard, for an example, I would say I can see my peach tree and it's heavy with fruit. I can hear the birds singing directly behind me in this tree, and I can taste the cinnamon that I added to my coffee this morning. I can touch the pages of my biblical commentary and fan them out. And I can smell the grass, damp with dew. Deep breaths help too. And if that feeling is this low-grade ugh as you're moving through your day, and you're finding it harder to get out of bed at a normal hour or enjoy the things that normally would make your soul sing or at least make you more momentarily joyful, a few tools from the depression toolbox might be useful, like doing something active. Exercising can help lift mood. Of course, as anybody who's had depression can probably attest to, sometimes just getting up is hard. And so exercise is not the quickest and easiest fix because just moving out of bed is a challenge. So, maybe the next step is to just check your eating habits, especially if this is your first bout with these kinds of lows, because depression and low mood can either make us not want to eat at all or make us want to comfort eat. And that's okay too, listening to what you need, but make sure you're throwing in some good stuff with it too. So if it's not just all the macaroni and cheese, when I hear this advice, I'm automatically like, okay, so put some strawberries on my ice cream. Check. It can also be helpful just to put words to your worries. So write them down, say them out loud, name them in prayer. This isn't the same as like sitting there and chanting to yourself in the corner, oh my gosh, I can't pay my phone bill. Oh my gosh, I can't pay my phone bill. Oh my gosh, I can't pay. Like, that's not helpful. And that's not one of the tips and tricks to getting through this. This is more bringing what is worrying you and bringing you down out to light and exposing it to air in hopes that it loses some of its sting. Keeping a blessings journal or recognizing one good thing for every negative thought is also one way to counteract and keep negative thoughts in check. Of course, this doesn't always work. And if these things don't work, therapists are indispensable. There are so many ways to have access to quality talk therapy these days, even while we're unable to physically sit on the therapist's couch. And there are warm lines provided by many behavioral health wings of local county government if you just need to talk through a particularly hairy episode of third quarter weirdness. Links to these resources will be provided below the transcript of this sermon. 1 in 4 folks is living with mental health challenges. That's the figures we've been given. But we also know that the health of one person can affect more people than just 1 in 4. Caring for the mental well-being of each other is an exercise in caring for our community as a whole. In our gospel reading today, we're given the promise that we are not alone. We will not be forgotten or orphaned by God. Love is a central theme and essential to our connection to the holy. And if we continue to love one another as Christ has loved us, then we are certainly never going to be abandoned. But how, when we're talking about mental health, can we know we are loving one another, especially as we get further into the agitation, irritability, and crummy bad mood days of the dreaded third quarter? Love isn't always a romantic gesture. Love can look like setting boundaries and telling your housemates, look, I'm really struggling today. It's not any of your fault, but I'm also asking for some grace and a whole lot of support. It can manifest in taking a cup of tea to your partner who you just noticed hasn't stopped staring at the same place on the wall in 20 minutes, just staring into the existential void of dread. It's loving one another is not judging. It doesn't judge. It doesn't demand someone to do more than they can. And it's important to remember that this goes for ourselves as well. Loving one another as Jesus loved us means extending the same grace to ourselves that we would to someone else. Love is taking those active steps necessary to care for ourselves when we are experiencing mental distress, including self-care, taking a day off, or picking up the phone and reaching out to a professional. In the John reading, Jesus says he will send an advocate. And this is the Spirit, which is a bridge between him and the people, a way to make the love of God accessible even when Jesus has gone physically from this earth. Advocacy is also a powerful word in the medical health world, when sometimes our mental health episodes go beyond what we can handle ourselves through deep breathing and taking a brisk walk. We have access to God's steadfast love, but remember, it's totally fine to be deeply loved by God while dialing the psychiatrist's office to make an appointment. I actually have a sticker on my laptop, let's see if I can find it, that says it's okay to have Jesus and a therapist too. It's probably turned around from the camera here, but once we've come out of the third quarter, once we've been through water and fire, when the wide open spaces God has provided for us start to appear again, and when this is all over, we should look at what we have taken from this time, the great strides we made to care for ourselves and others, and instead of going back to normal, what did we find that helped us to maintain or regain a healthy mental state while in the extreme situation of sheltering in place? The article suggested that after spending time in isolation, many people find that even with the dreaded third quarter, they wanted to return to it. Now, I'm not sure we'll all be itching to shelter in place quite so strictly, nor do I think we're crossing our fingers and hoping for another pandemic. But I think we may experience a similar sense of wanting to return to the sense of, to return to some of these things that we've learned in this time. I learned, for example, that I can't just push until eventually I scream. Asking for help and for space is something that I personally have to do to maintain healthy mental balance. There are projections that women may emerge from this time more confident in their abilities, and men may be more ready to seek the advice and help of their community instead of keeping it inside and staying kind of like stoic. How has this time changed you? How have you loved deeper in it? What small things have you found joy in that you never would have discovered otherwise? These are the things that lead to that fourth quarter expression of thanksgiving and gratitude that we heard in the psalm. And we need to remember that as we are in this weird third quarter, that fourth quarter is going to come and we're going to have a whole lot of gratitude and thanksgiving. This Mental Health Sunday, I encourage each of us to do a check-in with ourselves to see how we are feeling today at this moment. Extend yourself some love and grace where it might be needed. We won't be in the weird third quarter forever, but we don't know quite when we'll be out of it either. Remember how God has been faithful and steadfast to God's people, and suffering isn't some divine punishment for our iniquities, but instead it can provide a pathway to God's open arms where we will be strengthened and come out on the other end with some new tricks for how to handle even the hardest times. To end today, don't worry, I'm not going to scream for 45 seconds straight. Instead, we'll finish out with the last lines of the psalm. But truly, God has listened. He has given heed to the words of my prayer. Blessed be God, because he has not rejected my prayer or removed his steadfast love from me. Amen.